Welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. I'm James Kumarasamy. The arguments continue over the WHO trip to Wuhan. One of the scientists investigating the pandemic's origins tells us there was cooperation from the Chinese, but they could have provided more information.
Look, there was other data that we would have liked to have got. We didn't get all that.
We hear about the impact of the military coup in Myanmar.
People are really confused and scared. People are setting up private security in their neighborhoods. There's a lot of rumors about people being hired by the military to come cause problems.
And acquitted.
The Senate judges that the respondent, Donald John Trump, former President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the article of impeachment.
So what next for the former US President and his Republican Party? All of that after the news.
Hello, this is Danielle Jałowiecka with the BBC News. A senior member of the WHO mission to China to investigate the origins of COVID has defended the credibility of its work despite mounting criticism. US officials have expressed deep concern over the mission's independence. From Geneva, Imogen Folks reports.
Today, Professor John Watson sought to allay doubts, telling the BBC the China trip was the first step in a long process. For now, he said, there were a number of hypotheses about the origins of the virus, the most likely that it moved from one animal to an intermediate animal host and from there to humans. But the theory that it originated in a laboratory or escaped from one has not been ruled out. Neither has the possibility that frozen meat could have played a role in transmitting the virus to humans.
Guinea says it's facing a new Ebola epidemic 5 years after a disastrous outbreak in West Africa was brought to an end. Mary Harper reports.
The health authorities say 3 people have died from the disease and 5 others have tested positive. They all fell ill with diarrhoea, vomiting and bleeding after attending a burial. Health workers are now trying to trace and isolate all those who came in contact with those affected. The WHO has been asked to supply vaccines, which greatly improve survival rates. Cases have also been confirmed in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, its 12th outbreak of the disease.
Reports from Yemen say dozens of combatants have been killed in the past 24 hours as Houthi rebels intensify their long-running offensive against forces fighting for the government around the northern city of Marib. Our Arab Affairs editor Sebastian Usher reports.
It's hard to get reliable information from the front line in Yemen, but there's no doubt that the Houthis have in recent days redoubled their attacks on forces loyal to the government in their last northern stronghold. Pro-government sources say that 16 of their fighters and many more Houthis have been killed in the past day. Marib is not just strategically important, but it's also where a major oil refinery is located. The fall of the city and its surroundings would be a major blow for the government side.
Germany is enforcing temporary controls at its borders with the Czech Republic and the Tyrol region of Western Austria as it seeks to prevent the spread of new variants of coronavirus. It's only letting certain categories of people through. They include key workers, people with German residency and lorry drivers transporting goods, and only then if they register in advance and show a recent negative test result. The Tyrolean authorities say they'll start implementing checks further south at the busy Brenner Pass from Italy to ensure drivers bound for Germany have the right paperwork. They say they don't want the region turning into Europe's parking lot. World news from the BBC. Residents of New Zealand's largest city, Auckland, have started a 3-day snap lockdown to contain a small outbreak of coronavirus linked to the main airport. 1.7 million Aucklanders are ring-fenced from the rest of the country, where people must now wear masks on public transport. The 3 new community cases are the first in New Zealand since January. Sudan's former Vice President Hassabo Abdulrahman has been arrested, accused of fomenting protests against rising food prices. Other senior members of the former Bashir administration have also been detained. Earlier this week, about 300 people were arrested during protests across Sudan. States of emergency were declared in 4 provinces. Women protesters in Russia are forming human chains to show solidarity with fellow women who've suffered political persecution. They're holding white ribbons, red flowers and heart balloons. It's part of rival attempts by demonstrators and the authorities to draw attention to causes on Valentine's Day. Supporters of the jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny are holding short vigils using candles and mobile phone torches. Sarah Rainsford is in Moscow.
The opposition groups, those linked to Mr. Navalny, have said that they've moved to a new form of protest. They said there'd be a pause in the street protest because of the arrest. And now they've announced this, basically they're calling it a sort of a show of solidarity. Love against fear. They're saying love is stronger than fear. So they've asked people to light torches, to come out in their yards and to basically turn on a light and show their support for Mr. Navalny and their opposition. Putin.
Rescue workers in northern India have pulled out 9 more bodies from a tunnel which was flooded after a glacier broke away in the Himalayan region last week. Nearly 40 people were working inside the tunnel connected to a hydroelectric project when the flash flood struck. Officials said they were still hopeful of finding survivors. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to News Hour on the BBC World Service, coming to you live from London with James Kamara-Sami. And we begin with the visit by the WHO's team of experts to China and the continuing questions about how successful it was. They were there to explore the origins of the COVID pandemic, but how objective was the information they were able to gather? The White House says it's imperative that the report into their findings is free from alteration by the Chinese government, while China has hit back at accusations that it withheld information from the investigators. In a statement today, it accused the US of gravely damaging international cooperation by leaving the World Health Organization, even as it welcomed the Biden administration's reversal of that decision. Well, I've been speaking to one of the team who visited Wuhan, the Australian epidemiologist Dominic Dwyer, who's now back in quarantine in Sydney. So did he get access to the data that he had wanted?
We asked for a lot of data from the Chinese about their various surveillance systems for other forms of disease, such as influenza and so on, to see if there were signals in that sort of information that might have suggested that, disease was occurring in Wuhan before people kind of realised. I mean, look, there was other data that we would have liked to have got. We didn't get all that. But
and that's the raw data.
There are different types of data, obviously. There's a sort of aggregated of what were the first 174 cases in December 2019. And so we heard all of that data. But generally, when you're investigating an outbreak, ideally you would see what we call the line listing, the individual cases one after the other, to see what sort of questions were asked at the time of people who were sick, what sort of analyses were done, because as information becomes available, as the years gone on, we've learnt a lot, particularly around the transmission between people who aren't very sick or not sick at all, because that might make you redo the analyses in a different way. So we wanted to see some of that data. They certainly provided some of it, were not able to provide it all, but that information can come out then in the sort of second part of the work, which is around designing new studies to search out the origins.
And just to be clear, what reason were you given for not being able to get access to that data that you were after?
We didn't get a clear reason why it wasn't supplied. However,
it exists, so does it?
Of course it exists, yes, that's right. And we certainly saw some of it, but getting it into a form that enable outsiders to review it and go over it like you would do normally for any outbreak. I think that in our report, which is yet to be finally distributed, there'll be the opportunity in there to get the data that way.
And what about the locations? Were you able to see everything you wanted to when you went to the locations?
We were. So we had decided before we went the places that warranted visiting, such as the obvious ones like the Huanan Market and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, other laboratories. So everything that we wanted to go and see, they allowed us to go and see.
And in terms of the lab in Wuhan, are you now confident that you can rule out the notion that is where the virus originated?
There's obviously been a lot of discussion about whether there could have been a leak of some form from the laboratory, and we're acutely conscious of that. We visited the institute. It's a very fine laboratory, but importantly, we were able to talk to the laboratory manager and so on about a number of things. We'll ask them about their biosafety precautions and management. And also we spoke to the scientists doing the work on bat viruses. To have a laboratory leak generally those sorts of leakages, well, first of all, they're uncommon, but also they tend to be in a situation where people are actually growing the viruses or the bacteria in the lab in high sort of volume. And the virus that's most closely related to SARS-CoV-2 is a bat virus called RATG13. And in fact, that virus hasn't been cultured in the lab. It's only a sequence. It's only a viral genetic sequence. So that couldn't have leaked from the lab because it wasn't being grown. And anyway, it's too far away from SARS-CoV-2 to be the immediate parent virus, if you like. We certainly didn't exclude it, but we had to rate all the various hypotheses, and we rated that one as being highly unlikely. Doesn't mean it's closed off from further assessment or examination. Other ones are more likely to be the cause of the outbreak.
So what are they?
I think the most important one is the transmission from a bat. Bats carry these coronaviruses that are often distantly related to SARS-CoV-2. So we feel that the most likely thing that it's come from bats into probably some sort of intermediate animal like a pangolin or something like that, and then across into humans. The key is trying to understand when did that happen and how long had it been circulating perhaps in humans in an asymptomatic manner before it really got going in Wuhan and through the wet market in Wuhan.
And is that where the real importance of that raw data comes in? Because about, half of the cases initially found were exposed to that market?
This is, I think, what's tricky with the data is that we know that of those 174 cases, about half of them had exposure to the Huanan market, but the other half hadn't. And, of course, we were talking here about, in these cases, of people who presented to hospital with pneumonia or generally something pretty severe. But, in fact, as time has gone on with the pandemic, all countries now realise that there's a whole lot of spread by people who don't have any clinical signs or aren't particularly ill, not sick enough to go and see the doctor. So at that time, if there are 174 cases of sick people in Wuhan, there must have been many more cases of mild disease.
I'm really wondering what it was like in terms of those discussions about can we have access to everything that we want, all the raw data while we're there?
Look, I think it all, to be honest, I thought it was all actually pretty good considering the tension and difficulties and politics and all of that sort of stuff.
I just wonder from your point of view, clearly you went into this as a scientist, as an infectious diseases expert, keen to get to the bottom of this and to prevent future pandemics. But as you acknowledge, this is hyper-political in many ways. Are you satisfied that you've come out of this and that you can hold your head high and say, look, my reputation is absolutely fine. I was not used as a fig leaf by the Chinese authorities, that I was able to do everything within that was reasonable scientifically to try and find the origins of the pandemic?
Yes, I was. I'm quite satisfied that we got a vast amount of information, and certainly the WHO people mentioned they hadn't seen any of this stuff before over the last year. So, there was a lot of information that was new that was provided. Of course, there would be more that would be good to see and so on as well, and hopefully that will come. So even though the politics was palpable, in the room and so on, I think that at no stage was any decision or interpretation by us in WHO, and I'm not employed by WHO, I'm independent, of course. At no stage did I feel that we were having our stuff impeded by the political opinions of China or indeed other countries around the world.
Australian epidemiologist Dominic Dwyer speaking to me from Sydney. Mexico has lost more than 170,000 people to COVID-19. That's the third highest death toll in the world, while 300,000 have died in the country's decade-long war on drugs. In the city of Tijuana, just across the border with the United States, these twin causes of mass death are both prevalent. The BBC spent a week following a married couple of paramedics from the Red Cross as they navigated some rather distressing territory. Anne Laurent has the story.
This
This is the sound of a city overwhelmed with emergencies.
44 eco probable COVID con precauciones.
Daniel is a paramedic for the Red Cross. He's been working in the streets of Tijuana for the past 2 decades.
Okay.
Daniel is heading to a house call for an unconscious man. Local police escort him inside.
Entonces es importante determinar cuánto tiempo tiene.
After checking the patient's pulse, he has to break the news to his wife.
Okay. El señor ya falleció.
Your husband has passed away.
Ay, no, no es cierto. It can't be true. He's still warm.
Sí, mija, pero el problema
Yes,
del COVID.
but the problem with COVID is that they stop breathing.
This man was just 49 years old.
Lamentablemente es muy común.
Unfortunately, it's very common. It's only 11 in the morning and other colleagues have also reported several deaths due to COVID. It's fear of going to the hospital, of being treated. Many people think that if they stay at home, they will get better. They take medicines they would take for a normal flu and it doesn't work.
In another ambulance on the other side of town, Daniel's wife Aida is suiting up for another COVID emergency. She's putting on her hazmat suit, 3 pairs of gloves, and her respiratory mask. She knows firsthand what it's like to save a life while risking her own.
I already got COVID, and I'm afraid I'll get infected again. I'm scared I could give it to someone in my family.
As she takes her patient into the ambulance to transfer her to a COVID hospital, she's surrounded by family members.
Doctor, can we talk to her?
Yes, but at a distance.
As hospitals don't allow loved ones to visit patients infected with COVID, this could be the last chance to say goodbye.
We are here with you. You are not alone.
It's difficult. You just feel like crying when you hear family members speak like that, as if they're not going to see each other again.
Back at base, downtime is scarce for this and wife. In a city of about 2 million people with only a dozen ambulances available, emergency calls keep coming. And when the night falls, they are faced with another pandemic, gun violence. Juggling between COVID-related emergencies and cases of violence has become the new normal for paramedics like Aida. This is because the Red Cross, the emergency service she's working for, is the only one in the city of Tijuana fully prepared to attend this kind of high-risk emergencies. The police has just secured the shooting scene, and as Aida goes into the house, she finds a man lying on the floor with no pulse. She calls the doctor on duty to report the death.
He had 2 gunshot wounds to the chest, and we pronounced him dead at the scene.
With over 170,000 lives lost to COVID in Mexico and a surge in gun violence despite lockdowns, the job of this paramedic couple is unlikely to get easier anytime soon.
And Laurent there reporting from Tijuana in Mexico. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC. Coming up later on in the programme, New Zealand's biggest city, Auckland, goes into lockdown after 3 new local cases of COVID-19 are discovered.
There's no work or no school unless you're a child of someone who is an essential worker. This all came about as a result of these 3 community cases. No one really knows where the origin of the virus was.
On that later on. Reminder of our headlines at this hour. The World Health Organization has defended the credibility of its mission to China to investigate the origins of the coronavirus in the face of mounting international criticism. Guinea says it's facing a new Ebola epidemic 5 years after a disastrous outbreak in West Africa was brought to an end. And there are reports of intense fighting in Yemen as Houthi rebels try to capture one of the last pro-government strongholds in the north. You're listening to the BBC World Service. This is NewsHour, coming to you live from London.